There's been several changes in the dynamics of Lagos real estate in the past couple of months, especially in the Ibeju-Lekki and Epe axis. Recent events have sparked fear in the minds of a lot of investors, with some estate demolitions and new land acquisitions springing up in the Epe axis. But what exactly is going on? Is the government is injecting funds into a lot of developmental projects in the Ibeju-Lekki and Epe axis, and they're very intentional about development in this part of the state. So they're having to need more land for important projects in the pipeline. So does that mean the government is just going around taking people's property as they wish? That is not exactly so, but stay with me. There were several stakeholder meetings in the Ibeju-Lekki and Epe axis last year, and one of the key takeaways from the last Epe stakeholder meeting was the plan of the government to introduce some new developmental schemes in the region. So there will be Labour City in the Akodo part of Ibeju-Lekki and Epe mixed developmental scheme in strategic locations in Epe. So the body to be in charge of this development is NTDA, New Town Development Agency, and by their name you should understand why they need to be part of the urban developmental plan of Ibeju-Lekki and Epe. So here comes the big concern of a lot of investors. Are your lands in Ibeju-Lekki and Epe safe? To get a clearer view on this topic, let's track back a little to the real idea of land status and title in Lagos. There are two major divisions of land types in Lagos. The land is either a freehold land or an acquisition land. By the literal meaning, a freehold land is meant to be free and an acquisition land acquired. For an acquisition land, there are two further divisions. The land is either a committed acquisition or a general or non-committed acquisition. When a land is under committed acquisition, it means the land is earmarked for a particular project by the state government, and such lands are no-go areas. Government schemes can also be considered as committed lands, but you can own such land by properly getting a government allocation from NTDA, which is the New Town Development Agency. An example of that are several schemes in Ibeju-Lekki, like the Ayetoro scheme, the Eleko scheme, the Idera scheme, and the new ones coming up like the Labour City in Akodo and the Epe Mixed Developmental Scheme. But when a land is under general acquisition, it means you can own such land. But the route to getting title, which is majorly C4 governor's consent, will be to first get the land excised. By the word excised, it means getting the land released to people before you then get the land gazetted and then further get a governor's consent or C4. And on the other hand, a freehold land. By the word freehold, it means the land is free and you're meant to have a direct route to C4. But you need to understand there are zoning for every land, especially for places like Ibeju-Lekki and Epe where there's a master plan. A land can be zoned for either residential, commercial, agric, forestry, and several other uses. So an ideal freehold land with direct route to C4 has to be a land bought with the intention of using it for what the land is zoned for. For example, buying a residential land for a residential use, or buying an agric land for an agricultural use. But we all know that most of the residential estates sold in Epe in the past couple of years are majorly forestry and agric lands. And the normal solution to that used to be regularization, which means changing the status of the land from agriculture or forestry to residential. But you need to understand that things are changing and there are new policies coming up. And believe me, not all land are regularizable anymore. A typical example of a location with most land under acquisition is Ibeju-Lekki. That is why any land you're buying in Ibeju-Lekki must either have an approved excision, a gazette, a C4, governor's consent, or a government allocation. There is no such thing as freehold in Ibeju-Lekki for the past decade. So people buying land in Ibeju-Lekki in 2025 for 3 million, 5 million, calling it freehold, which is very common in the Igbogu and Odeomi part of Ibeju-Lekki. My advice for you is to revisit what you've invested in. The story is a bit different for Epe. Epe is where we are expected to get freehold land. But that is also about to be cut short, with NTDA coming into the picture with several developmental schemes. You see, the implication of buying a freehold land in the middle of nowhere and abandoning it without regularizing or perfecting its title, especially if it's a committed agric or forestry land, is that government can take such land from you with no compensation. NTD has recently acquired over 7,000 hectares of land for the Epe Mixed Developmental Scheme, and they also acquired over 3,000 hectares of land in Akodo for the Labour City Scheme. If you've bought land in Epe in the past, and you're worried about the fate of your investment. See, before you conclude that your land is gone, this is what you need to understand. If the land you bought is a committed land, you can as well kiss the land goodbye. But if you charted the land and you confirmed that the land is actually free and zoned for residential, you most likely have nothing to worry about. But if the land is zoned for agric, forestry, or industrial, depending on the location, regularization might be possible, but in some locations, it won't. And as it is, all title processing might eventually be going through an NTDA going forward, but we don't know that for sure anyways. But if the land you bought, unfortunately, falls within the acquired portion by the NTDA for the Epe Mixed Developmental Scheme, you really should be worried. But there should be a way out, which I believe will be very costly and require swift action. The expected way out, firstly, would require that the property you bought aligns with the plan of the government schemes. And if the land is not already allocated to someone else, the developer who sold to you will have to go to the NTDA to get an allocation, which will be very costly. You see, to conclude my story, I'd like to reiterate the importance of verifying a title before you buy. Even if it's an untitled land, at least chart the land so you know the status of the land, so you can understand the factors surrounding your properties and what you need to do to protect your investment.